Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer. Given that we're creeping up to Halloween, I thought I'd do a video on my favourite top 5 horror authors of all time. These are authors that I've read at different times in my life that I've really enjoyed books of. I may not have read a book of them recently, but they made a big impact in how I think about horror as a genre. Let's start the list now at number 5. At number 5, James Herbert. He's a great horror author with a great catalogue. I don't really care that a lot of his work is written in the 70s and 80s. I think a lot of it does age okay. There are certain elements, of course, that don't age as well as others, but the overall story, the overall plot, and the horror elements in the story still work well today as they would have in the 70s and 80s. And I've read a few of his books and I've enjoyed each one. There are quite a few I've yet to read yet, but I plan to read every book that he's written. And the books that I've read I've really enjoyed. And I've enjoyed them so much, he's made my top 5 list. I mean, this is an author that's given us books like The Rats, The Fog, Moon, those type of books, all written so well. And I did read Moon earlier this year and I thought it was still an amazing read. I did rate that a 4 out of 5 I think on Goodreads. I still think James Herbert is an amazing horror novelist. I think that a lot of other horror novelists should read him. Up and coming horror novelists, if you're out there wanting to write a horror novel, give these horror novelists who wrote in the 70s and 80s a chance. Go back and read them because they write horror that's structured very well. James Herbert wrote horror where we had great plot structure, great characters, the stories made sense. He wasn't there just to give us slash and gore, blood everywhere, guts everywhere. He was there to give us a good story behind it as well. And that's not to say that some of his stories don't have more gore than others, but in a lot of his stories we have really good substance to the story. Even though we have good horror elements, there's really good substance to it as well. So give James Herbert a go. And number 4 is Clive Barker. And Clive Barker is a staple in horror for a lot of people. He's given us some of the best horror stories, I think, of all time. And some really great horror movies on horror franchises are based on some of his short stories or his novellas. And I think he's also written scripts and movies that aren't based on his own works, just original scripts and movies. So overall, he's a really great figure in the horror genre. And he's also good at blending genres. In some of his novels, he has horror and fantasy blended together, like Weave World, and he has other elements going into his stories as well. But what has he given us? Some of the movies based on his works are Candyman, based on the short story The Forbidden, Hellraiser, based on the novella The Hellbound Heart, and Nightbreed, based on Cabal. Clive Barker has just made a career of not being boxed in to just the horror genre. So even though he's given us great horror moments and great horror stories, and some of the best horror moments I think of all time, of recent history anyway, he's not boxed in. And if you read through his catalogue, you'll see a lot of work where it just twists genres and blends genres, and that's part of his charm, part of who he is as a writer as well. And that's why he's in my top 5. Number 3 for me is Richard LAYMON, and he's a horror author who I've got many books on my shelves. I think I have almost all of them, and I had 1 or 2 that have been lost, and I need to get them back and read them again. I'm trying to read through all his books, and even now, though I read through some, and I find for me they're not as great as they used to be for me, and that's because of the splatterpunk effect in some of his stories, I still think he's written some of the best books in the horror genre, and he's also written books that are very unique. Some of his plots, some of his ideas in these stories are very unique, and I haven't seen them in other horror stories before. Maybe I just haven't read them elsewhere, maybe they do exist, but I haven't come across them. So I find Richard LAYMON a very unique character in the horror genre, and I find his voice very unique as well. What are some of the works of his that I like the most? Darkness Tell Us, After Midnight, The Travelling Vampire Show, Savage, and Blood Games. Those 5 books are really special books, in my opinion, in his catalogue. And you have to give LAYMON credit for not pulling punches in his stories. he really enjoys giving us cringeworthy moments in most of his books, and he doesn't shy away from giving us blood and gore, sometimes to a very, very strong degree. It was hard for me to choose between number 2 and number 1, because both these authors have written some of the best horror novels that I've read, and for different reasons. So it's very, very hard to choose between them both. But in my opinion, number 2 is Stephen King. Stephen King is one of the most prolific writers of modern times, and he's also written some really great horror novels. But I think the reason why I ranked him as number 2 is sometimes I get the feeling that his writing style sometimes lets the story down a little bit. He's not as suspenseful as the person I ranked as number 1. But Stephen King has given us some fantastic horror novels. I mean, Carrie, Cujo, It, Needful Things, to name a few. Also, stories that aren't 100% horror, like Misery and The Stand. They've got small horror elements in there, not 100% horror. And like the person at number 1, blending different genres in some books works to their advantage. But Stephen King, I think, just that writing style sometimes, it loses suspense for me in some of his novels. And I find that sometimes he gets a bit too wordy. I don't mind a long book, but I think that sometimes he just extends scenes for longer than they should be. But the great thing about Stephen King is how he writes his characters. He's well known for writing characters that can do the worst things that people can do. And that's what he likes to do. He likes to write characters that do the worst possible things that people can do. And that gives us the shock value. Sometimes the shock value is a little too much. Sometimes it's not enough. And I think sometimes he creates characters in his books that are sometimes too similar. Sometimes there's not enough light and shade in those characters. But overall, Stephen King has one of the best bodies of work of any modern author in the horror thriller genre, and I think he is one of the best authors of modern times, even though that writing style does let him down a little bit in certain stories, in my opinion. Number 1 for me is Dean Koontz. Not modern Dean Koontz, but earlier Dean Koontz in the 70s, 80s and 90s, where his horror novels were really spot on and his writing style was spot on, and his suspense in those stories was also spot on. Novels like Servants of Twilight, Twilight Eyes, Watchers, those type of novels, Fear Nothing, Seize the Night, great novels in the horror genre. He's also one of those authors in the horror genre that blends genres together. So he can blend horror and thriller. He can blend horror and action. He can blend horror and mystery, suspense. But for me, in my opinion, Koontz is better at creating suspense in his books than Stephen King. Koontz is kind of master at creating suspense, in my opinion. And in many of his novels, that suspense just drips from the pages, especially in those early works. Not so much the later works. I'm not a huge fan of Dean Koontz's later works. In my opinion, when Dean Koontz is at the best of his game, he's the best horror novelist that I've read. And as a longer form author, I think Stephen King may be more consistent, especially with some books he's written lately, because Dean Koontz doesn't seem to be as consistent in his later works. But if I'm focusing on horror and the horrors that I've enjoyed the most, that stick with me the most, I've got to say Dean Koontz. On my channel, I do review quite a few horror novels. If you don't want to miss out on those videos, check out my channel and subscribe. There's also a horror playlist on my channel. It should be on your screen now.